Hey, what's up? This is the final week of me watching and discussing every fall 2023 anime. Here I will be covering every episode released between December 25th and December 31st. It's been quite the journey to get to this point, but I am finally seeing it through to the end. In many ways, finishing this series was probably never worth it, but I just don't feel good about leaving things incomplete. I prefer to finish what I start, so that's what I did. I only had 3 episodes to watch in this final week, as everything else had either wrapped up or had a mini hiatus. Frieren and Kusuriya, for example, had a 1-week break in between the shift from the fall to the winter season, but I had a few words that I wanted to say about them this week either way. But aside from that, we only had Undead, Unluck, 16-bit Sensation and Hikikomari to get through. 16-bit Sensation and Hikikomari are the last 2 shows to end, and thus marking the end of this season as a whole. So, let's get after it. Undead Unluck, Episode 13. This was another solid episode, but I do think it's a step back from what we've gotten in the past few. Tatiana is a far less interesting character to me than the main duo, so naturally I wasn't going to be as entertained by an episode where she is the main focus. We get a whole lot of context for her character here and some backstory to explain some of her motivations. This doesn't entirely land for me, as I think much of it is a bit corny. The way Tatiana develops this strong bond with Fuku doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. She at one point explains that she is happy that Fuku treated her normally, but surely so would anyone else in this union squad. Is the big hitter just the fact that Fuku is a young girl? I mean, fair enough to some extent I guess, but for Fuku to instantly become someone super special to Tatiana like this seems like a bit much. Her history with her parents dying and all that also feels pretty uninspired, as this is such an incredibly common scenario in stories that feature supernatural abilities. I did get a bit hyped at the notion that she's actually a cute anime girl inside of that ball, but as we saw more and more of her non-ball design, I didn't actually find myself all that captivated by it. But either way, I don't actively dislike her as a character, I think she's decent enough. But she has obviously got nothing on the main duo. Oh, and the way the catalyst for this big dramatic detonation thing here was Tatiana seeing Undead Dude's dick was actually pretty damn spectacular. This felt like it was perfectly on point for the tone of this series, and here I actually thought the delivery nailed it. As this is all happening, we also get a bunch of footage that is super Evangelion-esque, and this is heavily appreciated by me. I love this kind of shit. This is basically the Geofront, and that is just super cool. Anyway, I really quite like these splash screens we get where they put the name of the character's ability on the screen as they demonstrate the effects of it in these big dramatic moments. All of these have been pretty damn cool so far, and this one was particularly impactful. The way the text is formatted and the way the animation builds up to it was dope. Decent episode all around. I hope we get to see some more of this unmoved dude in the next episode. He seems like a fun guy. "16-bit Sensation Another Layer", Episode 13. Alright then, here we are. The final episode of my favorite show of this fall season. When I spoke of episode 12, I mentioned that I thought this new direction that the show was going in felt uneven and had a lot of problems. This unfortunately continues to be the case even into this finale. This scene with the aliens felt incredibly vague and meaningless. They show up to save Konoha and Mamoru from being chased by all of these bad guys, and then neither the bad guys or the aliens are relevant ever again. This entire side plot of Konoha being kidnapped didn't really seem to add anything at all to the overall story, except to make some comments on how AI can make game development be even more cynical, I guess. These aliens are in a similar boat, as I never really ended up understanding what their purpose in the narrative was. Their first appearance in that episode where Mamoru time leaps seemed like it was intentionally structured to be confusing to the viewer, and I assumed this was because they were going to have some grand reveal of their big purpose at a later time. I didn't feel that this was something that really happened though. Their appearance here at the finale didn't seem like something that would justify their inclusion in the story. They just show up to save Konoha from an equally contrived scenario, and then they spout some nonsense about human imagination, and then they just leave. If this entire kidnapping portion of the show would have been cut out and would have just gone straight to Konoha and the crew making this final game, then I feel like this would have been a much more impactful ending, even if it would have been more predictable. As it stands, we do still get this one final game-making journey towards the second half of this episode, but this doesn't really manage to land with any real emphasis on account of there simply not being enough time in the episode to flesh it out properly. The gang all assemble once again, which is a lovely moment all on its own, but then their presence in the episode vanishes just as quickly as they all appear. The entire process of making this supposedly legendary game is completely glossed over, and I think that's a real bummer. This conversation that Konoha and Mamoru have while walking around Akihabara did manage to once again resonate with me, however, and I'm glad they allowed the time for this to take place. It was a very comforting little summary of sorts of everything that these characters have been doing up until this point, and it felt like an elegant way to wrap up these two characters' stories. Towards the end here, the plan seems to be for Konoha to go back to 1999 and sell this new game that they've made, and thus change the course of history in a way that doesn't remove the presence of Bishoujo from Akihabara. This sounds cool, and I was pretty hyped to go back to 1999 one last time before the show wraps up. With this in mind then, it was a bit of a bummer that this too was also glossed over, or rather completely skipped. Konoha goes from this version of 2023 straight to the fixed version of 2023. Most of the ongoing plot points do wrap up by the end here, but many of them don't get the attention that they deserve, and so a lot of things end up lacking in emphasis. Overall, a lot of scenes feel quite rushed here, and I'm assuming this is because of the limited amount of time available to portray everything that needed to be jammed in. It is then particularly interesting that so much time was spent on things that didn't really add much to the overall story, when that time could perhaps have been much better spent on fleshing out the parts that really did matter. Either way though, I thought this reunion with Mamoru at the end here was decent enough, and I thought it was a strong note to end the episode on. I would have preferred to get to see some more of what the rest of the crew are doing these days too, but I suppose it is what it is. So, with all of this in mind, where does this series stack up in the fall 2023 season? I have considered it to be my favorite show of the season, and even though things kind of fell apart a bit towards the end here, I do still consider it to be my favorite. This ride ended up being very uneven, but the highs were truly high, even though the lows were also quite low. My two other candidates for my favorite show of the season would be Kusuriya no Hitorigoto and Sousou no Frieren, and if I were to compare these two to 16-bit Sensation, I would still consider that to be an easy choice. Both Kusuriya and Frieren have been very consistent in their quality, which is naturally a good thing, but even though both of these have been consistently strong, neither of these have had peaks that have been as high as what 16-bit Sensation has managed to achieve for me. Both Kusuriya and Frieren likely aim for a much wider range of appeal. These shows don't really rely on any prior experience or interest from the audience, but 16-bit Sensation really does. 16-bit Sensation has a large amount of very specific elements that manage to very specifically appeal to me, and the result of this is obviously that a very strong experience is had. Even just the fact that much of the show is set in an authentic Akihabara is to me an absolutely huge deal, as I've been there myself and I have first-hand experience with the place. Being able to recognize and appreciate locations that I've visited in real life is a joy that is difficult to explain, and this is further emphasized by the fact that I also have my own appreciation for the town. And then there's also the matter of how this show speaks about otaku culture, which is also something that most casual consumers wouldn't really understand, but that I very much do connect with. The first couple of episodes of this show were truly magical to me on account of it doing so many things that I had very specifically been in longing of. So, even if Kusuriya and Frieren are much stronger productions, their core narratives are to me much more generic and not quite as interesting as what I was given in 16-bit Sensation. This is obviously a very personal thing, but so is everything when it comes to artistic media. I just happen to be the right person for this particular series. So, even though the ending left much to be desired, I will likely remember this series very fondly. Especially Konoha as a character left a very strong impression with me, and she is definitely up there with many of my all-time favorite anime characters. This has certainly been quite the ride, and I find it bittersweet to have reached the end of it. I've heard that the manga is actually really quite different from this anime adaptation, so my next step from here is probably to go and read that. I'd certainly enjoy getting to see the gang just make some cozy games again. But I suppose this is farewell for now. Thank you 16-bit Sensation for a cool adventure. There was no episode of Frieren during this week, as this show had a 1-week gap in between the shift from fall to winter. Episode 17 marks the point of the next Cour, I'm assuming, since it is now airing in the winter 2024 season and it has changed to a new OP and ED. This 17th episode doesn't actually belong here in this video, but I still want to mention that I quite adore the new OP. I do quite enjoy the music Yorushika makes, and this song here is certainly no exception. Super cozy track. I was quite disappointed that the new ED is just a different arrangement of the same song, however, especially considering the fact that I wasn't all that fond of it even the first time around. But hey, what can you do? You win some, you lose some. Hikikomari Kyuuketsuki no Monmon, Episode 12. Whoa, we're at the last episode. And it's just another tasteless edgefest. Wonderful. This is probably the most egregious episode of this whole series. I'm not sure if there is even a single scene that isn't this cringy and embarrassingly overt mess. The design of this pink hair lady while she is in a rage state is just obnoxious, and I hate this violent better than you attitude that these characters all have while in this state. I'm assuming this is meant to seem cool or intimidating, but to me it is just ridiculous and annoying. Pink lady sucker punching this maid girl in the face was kind of funny though, I guess. But then Hikikomari drinks some blood again and another edgelord enters the mix. Yippee. And I guess she's copied Gilgamesh's Gate of Babylon ability somehow? How fucking dare you? Anyway, we then get a bunch more needlessly dramatic and tasteless dialogue between all of these characters until Hikikomari then eventually kills this bad guy while spouting threats with his forced monotone voice. So cool. Then everything wraps up with Hikikomari's entourage all being obsessed with wanting to be with her or whatever, and this all just feels painfully formulaic. I can totally get behind the concept of this, and it does feel like something that would be a good fit for the show, but the way it was presented here was just annoying. It's like watching a harem show where all of the girls are just these one-dimensional zombies who wants the MC's dick. Except here the MC is a girl. Anyway, whatever. The show is over now and I'm quite pleased with that fact. I still think it's a shame that Hikikomari's wonderful character design and personality template wasn't put to better use in a more tasteful series. But at least I got some cool art to peruse, I suppose, so I guess that's something. There were some parts of this show that I did enjoy. I did think that a good chunk of the comedy did work, but I hated just about every second of drama and action that the show tried to pull, as I just could not connect with the way they were doing it. And since this made up such a significant portion of the show, especially towards the end, this obviously kind of ruined it for me. But so it goes, I suppose. I did speculate in the beginning of this show that getting baited by Hikikomari's cute design was probably a bad idea, and it seems like that was indeed the correct impression. But sometimes I just can't help it. Cute anime girls are like a drug, man. Sometimes I just need to get that fixed, and Hikikomari seemed like a good source. But like with most drugs, I guess the side effects are sometimes quite severe. I definitely shouldn't have kept watching this series past the first few episodes, and I'm quite relieved that it's finally over. Goodbye, Hikikomari. I'll see you on Galburu instead. There was no episode of Kusuriya this week for similar reasons that there was no Frieren episode this week. The show had a 1-week gap in between the shifts from fall to winter. Episode 13 marks the point of the next Cour, I'm assuming, since it is now airing in the winter 2024 season and it is changed to new OP and ED. These new tracks were pretty cool, and especially the visuals in this new OP go absurdly hard. I kind of miss all of the usage of pure black that the previous OP had going, as it looked awesome on OLED displays, but the visuals here have a completely different brand of awesome and I quite adore it. Cool shit all around. I'm excited to see where this show goes as it continues into the winter 2024 season. And there we go. That is everything for this season and also for this little video series of mine. Undead Unluck, Kusuriya no Hitorigoto and Sousou no Frieren will be continuing along into the winter season, and I'm looking forward to seeing where they all go from here. 16-Bit Sensation was my favorite series of the season basically ever since that show aired its second episode, and that remained being the case all the way until the end. It was a very uneven and bumpy ride towards the end of it, but it had such a unique identity that managed to very specifically appeal to me in particular. Kusuriya no Hitorigoto and Sousou no Frieren would take the second and third places respectively, as I was quite fond of these shows too. There were a good amount of shows that drew me in at the start but then fell off for me along the way. Some of these became kind of mediocre and dull, while others ended up actively pissing me off with every airing episode. Since this is the end of this little project of mine, I thought I'd reflect a bit over how I've felt about making these videos. For a good few years now I've made it a point to watch at least a little bit of every new anime that airs. Most of the time I drop stuff at the first episode, but I still usually end up watching maybe 15 or 20 shows per season. I've long wanted to be able to see some active discussion of airing shows, as there are many cases where I'd love to see how other viewers experience certain events of certain episodes. Sort of like a let's play but for watching anime, I guess. I haven't really been able to find anyone making something that matches this description, at least not in the form that I have been looking for, and so I figured I could try making it myself. As I have been making these videos, I think it has become quite clear that there isn't really a significant demand for this type of content. They have all performed quite poorly, and this is further emphasized by the fact that just about every single excerpt from these long videos have performed better when uploaded on their own. I often considered just scrapping this entire series, as it clearly was a misguided way to spend my time and effort, but I don't usually feel good about leaving things incomplete. If I do start something, I do generally want to make sure that I finish it before I start too many new things. This has at many times been a pretty tiring decision, as some of these weekly videos have genuinely taken 60+ hours to make. When taking into consideration that this 60-hour job needs to be done within the span of a single week, this ended up being a sort of stressful project at times. But I have certainly learned a lot along the way, and I've found many small ways to make my video making process more efficient. These videos are also my first attempt at ever making any kind of voiceover commentary. When I was a kid, I often wanted to give this a try, but I could never get over the embarrassment of recording my own voice. So in many ways, I've taken some big step towards overcoming some of these limitations. I still think I sound like a totally boring dork, even when talking about things that I am genuinely enthusiastic about, but there is always more to learn, I suppose. No matter the case, I do think I sound a lot better in these later videos than I did at the start. So, if you've been watching anime for really any length of time, you can probably tell from that title that this is a light novel adaptation. And not just any Ellen adaptation either, it's a fantasy light novel. Either way, I've gotten a good chunk of speaking experience while making these videos, and even though the videos themselves didn't necessarily accomplish much, at least I've gotten a good amount of personal experience in the process. But I have no intention of making any more of these videos, at least not in this same format. I think it would be much more worthwhile for me to try to invest this effort into a larger number of shorter videos instead, as this seems to be much more appealing to a typical viewer. In general, I feel that I've also learned a lot about what does and does not work on YouTube, and how I should perhaps try to approach video making in the future. It's a pretty great relief to finally be done with this 3-month-long project and no longer have to feel it hanging over my head. I still have lots to do at the time of writing this. I still need to actually record the voice things, edit the voice things, and edit video on top of it and all that, but either way I am very near the end and that feels pretty cool. I don't expect that even a single person will be listening to this, but just at the off chance that someone is, big thanks for watching this far. If you have any thoughts to share about any of these videos, or if you just want to gush about some anime you like, hit me up in the comments. And with that, I think I'll finally wrap this all up. The fall 2023 season is done and dusted, and I'm looking forward to a much more relaxing winter 2024 season, where I don't have to stress about making a video every single week. Damn, that sure does sound pretty hot. Thanks for watching my stuff, I hope you have a cool day, and see you in the next video perhaps.